Hey, this is Steve Bloom, and you are listening to the Geekcast Radio Network.
Hello and welcome to Cinema Geeks as we continue our Quentin Tarantino retrospective. Today, we will be reviewing Quentin Tarantino's World War II epic, Inglourious Basterds. But before we get to the review, let's go over who's here. You have me, of course, Movie Revolt Dan, and joining us, as always, is Kevin Optimus Solo. How's it going, man?
It's going great, man.
Hopefully, we have a little better results this episode than last, because I know last one we gave our lowest score so far. We were trending downwards with our scoring. We'll see how we end up with Tarantino's last two movies. So,
yeah, I'm interested to see, because also you said kind of teased a little bit, I think, last episode where you said the original viewing of this film that we're talking about today, you didn't necessarily have a positive reaction to. So I'm going to be interested both to see what you think caused that, or what your reasons were for that, and then how things have changed or not changed since then.
Definitely, yeah. I did kind of tease that last episode. We'll definitely get into that. A lot to really go over with Inglourious Basterds. There's a huge history here with this film. It's been well reported. It was a script that Tarantino wrote for like 10 plus years. He finally kind of came to do it once Death Proof didn't have the success he was hoping for, to kind of finally finish that project. So I do like to start all these with a question, and this kind of question came to me partially because I know you're such a history buff, so I thought this would be a good place to start. So, with Inglourious Basterds, we do get to see when historical fact blends with Quentin Tarantino's fiction. My question for you is, knowing the massive and tragic impact of World War II had on the world and your own love of historical fact, do you take issue with Quentin Tarantino rewriting it to fit into his own artistic vision? Or does it show us that old saying that history is written by the winners needs to have an addendum to also say, and rewritten by movie makers?
That's a good question. Actually, that's kind of interesting, because I was listening to a podcast today on something completely different. I was going back through some old podcasts, actually, and it happened to be a podcast that was reviewing, I think it was like Dracula Untold or something from last year. Never thought
that wasn't historical fact.
Yeah, never thought we'd get a Dracula Untold mention while we were in Tarantino Spotlight, did you?
No.
But it spawned some discussion between the host on source material and that type of stuff, which is kind of similar, I guess, when you're talking about historical accuracy or not. It's hard, because what I got myself thinking was I was kind of going off on a tangent, and I was thinking, I'm usually one that has not. I don't have issue when it is a fictional source material. Like, you can take the world of whatever G.I. Joe, and you can make something of that, and it doesn't have to be true necessarily to that source material as much for me, because it's a fictional source material to begin with. And I was thinking, but I usually do have somewhat of a strong reaction when it's a historical item that then is being kind of changed or, edited or whatever. But then I was thinking to myself, wait a second, am I being a hypocrite here? Because I didn't have that problem at all with this movie and some other movies that might do it in the same vein. And so I was trying to come to terms with myself, like, when is it not okay for me? And I guess maybe tone has something to do with it. Maybe mostly the intent. What is the intent of the director or of whoever's in charge? And if the intent is something like it is with Tarantino in this one, I guess just naturally I don't have a problem with it, compared to, let's say, a director that was creating something and then putting it out there as if this is how it happened. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
It's different. And the reason I have that problem is not from my own perspective. Like, I know the true or not necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of history out there, so there's no way I
Yeah.
could know all of it. But let's say if it was one of my areas of expertise, I guess when it came to history, I'll know the truth and I know what's not true, so it doesn't bother me because I'll be able to discern it. But the problem I have is if it's something that is presented as fact and then it is put out there where people are going to take that in that aren't maybe as versed in that subject, and then they're going to think that's how that happened or that's how that was. So I mean, that I guess that's more the teacher in me. Like, I don't want to have to correct people's misconceptions because, hey, the movies told me this is how it happened. So I guess it's kind of a blurry line, but for me it comes down to what was the intent and how was it presented. And when it's presented like it is in this movie and with the intentions that Tarantino had, I have no issue. It'd be much different if it was saying, this is exactly how the battle of such and such happened in World War II, and it's completely BS and it's Pearl Harbor bad or something.
Yeah.
Like that.
It's like, that battle of World War II that had dinosaurs in it. It's
Yeah.
Like, no, that didn't actually happen that way.
Right.
I get I definitely kind of get what you're saying. I think intent, the way I kind of look at it too is just how effective that change is. Like, if there are movies based upon historical facts, there's tons of them, and none of them are 100% accurate to the source material, from even 12 Years a Slave to
Right.
Amistad to Gone with the Wind. I mean, they all take historical fact and
I think last year a couple that came up that were talked about a lot, not to interrupt you, were both American Sniper and Unbroken. Is Unbroken? Am I getting the right name? I get all my names mixed up, but with O'Connell.
71.
No, but
yeah. Oh, sorry, Unbroken. Yeah.
I think people had issue with.
I forgot all about that movie
with both Unbroken and American Sniper for similar issues. But I didn't mean to interject. But I'm just saying.
No, I think that's actually a good comparison because, to me, it's like, what does that change do? Like, is that change going to have some sort of thematic element to it? Is it more about telling us about the story, the character, or is there almost, especially when you come to something that's more recent, more of a political standpoint where you're changing something? Mm-hmm. That where it gets a little bit murkier. 12 Years a Slave, they've changed things, but I don't think it was for a political stance. It was to fit within the story that they're telling.
Right.
American Sniper, for example, made some leaps and some changes that I think were bad. I like that movie, but a little bit. But I think there were like the story elements that were added that made it worse. That the whole like additional sniper type of situation with Quentin Tarantino's film, there's no question whatsoever going into this. I hope to God not, at least, that someone's walking into this thinking, well, this is a realistic approach to what really happened then. That's clearly not the case. With American Sniper, I think it presents itself that way, so
right.
Those changes are a little bit more evident. So if it's a little murkier when you're drastically relating things over and all. But with this, it's like Tarantino's changing things. I think, but like he said, his characters don't realize that they're in a movie, so they change the outcome of what happened because they're his characters, and that's what he wants to happen. So I the first time I saw it, I was a little taken back by it because I'm like, what just happened? Like that, he really went all the way with it. I did not, that was unexpected. And not necessarily, it was kind of shocking because the entire time I'm watching this, the first time, I know what happens in World War II. So obviously that's not going to change anything. And then, oh no, Quentin Tarantino is going to make his own history, which is fine with me. But I was curious because I know you've expressed some issues with people who've done it, but I think like you said, it's a case by case basis. It's how it's done.
But I think it is something that you have to be careful of as people who podcast about movies, as people who write reviews about movies, etc. I mean, because I think we can find ourselves sometimes getting caught up with some of those details at points, or having problems with sometimes and then not having problems with others. And I think there is kind of a line that you have to draw for yourself. When do you have an issue with it and why, and are you consistent with that? Because even myself, I probably have kind of contradicted myself at different times.
Oh yeah,
movies,
all do that.
Kind of depending on how it hit me at the time. But I think as in later days, looking back, and when you kind of look back at those films, I hope that, for me at least, that it comes down to, what was the intent and what were we trying, and are we trying to portray something to someone in a false manner, or are we simply adjusting things to fit the narrative that we're telling or the message we're giving or whatever purpose we had in making the film, and hopefully we're good enough or intelligent enough to try to find that line and not get too caught up in the moment like I'm sure I have in the past.
Yeah.
And I think something else that's enjoyable out of this film, though, is it presents itself obviously immediately, hopefully, like you said, as clearly something that is not necessarily factual, but I do like the amount of factual things and accurate things they do throw in there along the way.
Yeah, it's not completely outlandish. I make it seem like it's not, but there are certain things obviously that kind of stick out, but there is a lot of reality in what's being told and what's being said, and I think that's what makes it even more effective.
And even from like a linear standpoint, you could almost go up to a certain point in the movie and say everything before that is basically maybe not 100%, but is basically somewhat factual. You know what I mean? Like it's not. There's an express point where they decide to say, and then now we're going to rewrite history.
Yeah, it's like a timeline. It's like this is the Quentin Tarantino timeline, and this is real timeline.
Yeah, we had an alternate reality that we kind of veered off on, but I do like the amount of stuff that they do come up with, or they do include, that was stuff that actually was factual, and we'll kind of probably get into a few of those things as we go through. So
yeah, definitely. And one thing too I hear about that was one complaint I hear. Some people just naturally have resistance to changing historical fact. But another complaint just on a movie making standpoint I hear with Inglourious Basterds is that people can recognize the scenes individually are, brilliantly told. They're done really well, but cohesively they don't all fit together. It's kind of like 3 different movies that don't seem like they belong. Did you personally have that issue where you felt like these characters didn't necessarily exist in the same world, or did you feel like there was a cohesion there that made it all kind of gel together?
I didn't see that at all. And I was watching in one of the special features, I think on whatever copy of, I think I have the Blu-ray copy. I don't know if there's multiple copies of it or not, but there's an actual roundtable with Brad Pitt and Quentin Tarantino and the gentleman that's doing the kind of the questions. And they kind of touch on this a little bit too. And I didn't, as Tarantino says it, he basically says, look, I had my first 3 chapters are introducing my 3 characters that this film is based on. I introduce Hans Landa, I introduce Shoshana, and I introduce Aldo, Brad Pitt's character. And it's like, those are what the first 3 chapters are supposed to do, give you the introduction basically of all 3 of those characters. And then from there, everything else is kind of the actual story and the adventure of how those 3 characters come into contact with each other, intermingle, come in and out of each other's lives, etc., building towards the climax, obviously. And that's exactly how I saw it when I was watching it. I mean, I might not have been able to break it down in the moment like that, but that I kind of liked it. Out of all of the Tarantino films, and they've all kind of had that structure where they do the chapters and the like you're reading a book type thing. So I don't know if it's just because at this point, however many movies were into this thing, that we're just used to it, but I definitely had no problem with it, and I actually felt like it kind of gelled even more than it has maybe in a couple of the other films that we've watched. I don't know, how did you feel about that?
To me, I didn't have an issue with the cohesion whatsoever, because I felt like the one thing that ties them all together is the theme of theatrics, that and how that plays into what they do. Theatrics using to intimidate, theatrics used to motivate, theatrics used to basically persuade, and that's all over this film. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about it, from it taking place in Nazi occupied France, and what organization used propaganda and theatrics more than that of the Nazis. That's very much what they did for intimidation purposes and whatnot. And even starting with the very first scene, and Hans Landa, from the moment he walks on screen, he's putting on a show. And he chooses his words very purposely. Like, there's no question when he walks, to me, when I'm reading that scene, watching that scene over and over again, there's no question in my mind that he knows exactly what he needs to know. He's speaking with Monsieur Lapetite, just to kind of just wield his power. Like it's not a question for him. I think he's just putting on this act, and even the pipe, for example. I think that's a good example of that. How he knows that he has a pipe, so he pulls out even bigger pipe just to use a visual aid to show you that I am more than you. I have control over you. I am bigger than you in this moment. So he has theatrics in that realm. It's the Inglourious Basterds themselves, I think, very much rely on theatrics. Everything they do is about intimidating the Nazis. One of the first scenes we see with the Bear Jew, that to me is like something that's straight out of like vaudeville, straight out of like professional wrestling. You have this guy who is emerging from the shadows, who has all batting the bat with the echoes louder and louder and louder coming up, where and using violence in a way as theatrics to intimidate the other soldiers to get the information they want. And then, again, with the finale, how Shoshana, she didn't just want revenge. She wanted to hit them at another level. So what does she use? She uses, film. She uses, again, it's about showmanship. So I think that's all over. Even inside the movie itself, we see that with the movie inside the movie. So I thought thematically they all shared very similar elements, in that to me being the biggest one. So I never saw an issue with the cohesion. I felt like they were all kind of taking the same idea, but with different perspectives, from the Nazi perspective to the American perspective to the victim perspective. So I never had that issue.
And at the same time, even probably to help this even more, he doesn't necessarily really change too much of the style of each one of these different parts. Like we've seen in a few of the other films where he helps kind of illustrate the different sections by also filming them differently, whether it be with the use, like in Kill Bill, with animation and black and white and different things like that. But with these, I think in an attempt to keep it all kind of a cohesive unit, they're all pretty much the same type of style. I mean, maybe someone with a much better eye for, different type of, cinematography and stuff like that might be able to pick out something that I can't, but it feels like they're all very similarly shot, very similar in tone and kind of all the aesthetics to make it go together.
I would say like Lieutenant Aldo Rain and say Hans Landa are different in the sense like Aldo Rain does feel like a cartoon character,
right?
But I think so does Hans Landa, but a different type of cartoon character, more like menacing. He's more like a comic book villain in a lot of ways, especially when you see him kind of engage in violence, and he's like the Nazi Batman. It's like his detective skills, and so I agree. I think I could see where those Christopher Waltz and Brad Pitt, their acting approach in this are very different. Like on the surface, I can understand where people feel like they're different, but I think when you really look at what they're doing, they're very much in the same vein of one another. Maybe the performances, I know a lot of people have issue with Aldo Rain or Brad Pitt, maybe his accent, but I don't know, something about his accent I really dug. It was like so bad it was good. It was, I don't know, like every line he had, I enjoyed. It was just fun to me. It was enjoyable. It was like a good song or something like that. I want my Nazi scalps to oblige him. Like he always was able to finish the sentence with such reverence and such like a cool attitude that I loved it. I found him very funny and humorous. So I don't know. I really enjoyed the performance.
Anybody that had a problem with his accent or the way he was talking, what did you want? Well, I mean, did you want something more realistic in this? The story that we're put into. I mean, that adds to the effect that it knows what it's doing. It's not taking itself so serious. And I agree with you. Like the accents that he uses, the emphasis he puts on certain syllables, is just absolutely. I found myself writing down more of his lines probably than anything else, especially when he says "Buongiorno" and "Arrivederci." Those are just I have to stop the movie almost because I'm laughing too hard for a couple minutes and just stop it.
That scene when they're pronouncing their Italian names over and twice. It's brilliant.
Or his line with, I think it was his line at that point, when he says, Stonewall Jackson, you don't have to be Stonewall Jackson to know you don't want to fight in a basement. He has some great lines in this film, but the opening thing that we get from him, his opening speech just sets the tone. And the first time he says Nazi, it's just, oh
My
man,
name is
I
Lieutenant
looked
Aldo
forward to
Rain,
every time he was
and I'm
speaking in
putting
this whole
together a
thing.
special team, and I need me 8 soldiers. 8 Jewish American soldiers. Now, y'all might have heard rumors about the Armada happening soon. Well, we'll be leaving a little earlier. We're gonna be dropped into France dressed as civilians. And once we're in enemy territory, as a bushwhacking guerrilla army, we're gonna be doing one thing and one thing only. Killing Nazis.
Yeah, I agree. I found
And I guess
that.
like part of that too, again, coming from that kind of roundtable, was some of that is not necessarily how Tarantino saw the character, and not necessarily how he saw him saying some of that stuff. Like I think they specifically mentioned the Buongiorno and the Arrivederci, but when they were doing the initial reading for it, and Brad Pitt did that, Tarantino says that basically he couldn't get that image out of his head. Like that became what he saw the character as. So
Yeah. I think, with Death Proof, we mentioned, like, it didn't feel like any character was specifically written for an actor. And I know this is something he worked on for such a long time that was kind of the case, but I thought he gave each actor enough room that, yeah, they might have been his words, but the cadence, like you mentioned, were the actors themselves. And I mean, you have to start. We haven't talked about him yet. We have to, though. And that's obviously Christoph Waltz in that opening sequence where that's like him basically announcing his presence to the world of like, yeah, I'm going to be the next big actor. Like, you look at what Quentin Tarantino did for Samuel L. Jackson with Julius. It's so much the same here. Christoph Waltz with Hans Landa. It plays to his strengths as an actor. And I think it's mostly just Quentin Tarantino seeing this guy that he, by all means, never even knew about before he went through this process. But I think at least, letting Christoph Waltz be himself, and certainly his language skills played a huge part in this. And it's been said a million times that opening sequence is brilliant. And I agree. Like, to me, if it's one of the best openings I think I've ever seen. There's a lot of movies, great films I have not seen, but if looking at the movies I have, I think it's one of my all-time favorites. I should say, maybe I preface it by not saying best, but saying favorites. It's one of my favorite openings of Tarantino, which is saying a lot, but just in general, I don't know how you feel about that opening 20-minute sequence with Hans Landa.
no, and it also adds to kind of what we were talking about before with the connectivity between the sequences and the cohesion throughout the story, because not only is it setting up a lot of things with that character, but another theme outside of the theme that you already mentioned with the cinema and kind of the whole movie thing is the idea that you just touched on with the languages and how much of a part that plays for this whole movie. And that's set up right from the beginning with this. And I love in that first scene when he all of a sudden stops and he's like switching languages to English. The way that comes across is so hilarious. And Tarantino was so smart in how he constructed this film with the languages to kind of call out every other film that has been made for American audiences about things that are taking place in other countries, especially when it comes to war, and just how all of a sudden everybody just knows how to speak English.
Exactly.
And it plays on it in so many different ways, though. Not just by having all the different languages spoke. I mean, we have a bunch of French, we have a bunch of German, obviously Italian a little bit, and we have all of that kind of smattered throughout, but it's more than just including it. It's just kind of the way they switch from one to the other, or the way they kind of pull out the fact that and he talks about this a little bit in the roundtable. I'm not going to talk about it again, but how it creates the opportunity to do things that no other war allows us to do, because this is a war fought by, for lack of a better term, between white males. And outside of language, it becomes very hard to determine what side somebody's on. Or it becomes easier for people to try to play the imposter, kind of play the imitation game as far as blending in and acting as a different countryman, because it all came down to the language and the customs. That's how you could be sure that someone was on your side or against it. You know what I mean? It's not just something easy to, that you can just see visually. So that played a big part in World War II. And when we're in here, right down in areas that are experiencing the war firsthand. And I think it plays on that a little bit too. And kind of just this whole idea that you could try to impersonate somebody from a different country, but can you get the language down? Can you get the customs down? And that type of thing. Otherwise you're in trouble. So, I mean, it plays a lot. The language throughout the whole film, I think, is a very important part, and it comes right out in this first scene with Christoph Waltz.
Definitely. And I can't think of another director that could have a film that literally has, I don't know, an hour or so. I didn't time it, but a good chunk of its film where not any English is spoken, and it's all subtitled. And it's that an American director could do that and get people on a wide audience to come see his movie. There's not many people that can get that done. Like there's not, or would be even willing to try.
Do you think this is a perfect movie to start somebody that is anti-subtitle?
Possibly. I think so. Because I feel
like you don't even realize that you're reading subtitles when you're watching this.
It could be. It could be a good place to start. If you don't tell them going in, it's like, you just show them the Brad Pitt parts and then they'll think it's all English. It's a good point. Like, I did mention when I first saw this, I wasn't a big fan of it. And a big reason why is, I don't know if you even remember when the trailers were coming out, but the trailers made it seem like that it was going to be basically Kill Bill, but a World War II film.
It seemed like it was the entire focus was going to be on all those people and how they're just going at it and killing everybody.
Exactly. Thought it was going to be Inglourious Basterds, it was going to be Quentin Tarantino's 30 Dozen, and it wasn't that at all.
No.
So I think when I watched it the first time, I was, this guy comes on screen. I don't even know who he is. I'm not even really, I'm thinking, this is just some scene. It's not really important. And we'll move on to the more important stuff later. So I think my thought of what it was going in, my anticipation of what it was going in, and it's something completely different. It's not, people say it's his 30 Dozen movie. It's not at all. Like the Inglourious Basterds are really not even the main part of this. And the first time that did bother me because it's like, I like them and I wanted more of them, and I thought it was a lot slower because it doesn't really have the action I was anticipating. Like I said, I thought it'd be like Kill Bill, like that hyper action, and it's not that at all. So my anticipation, my expectations were not at all met. So I ended up just being kind of bored with it, and I ended up missing, I think, a great deal because I was so fixated on what I wasn't seeing. I wasn't really looking at what was in front of me. And also didn't see, and the greatest thing, I saw it on the drive-in, which is not, it's probably not the best way to watch this movie. It was the drive-in after, and it was also like after seeing the original G.I. Joe. So maybe my head was not in the right spot. So it was maybe not the best thing in the world. So I ended up being kind of bored and ended up disappointed with it. But I ended up, I got so much praise. I was like, wow, I thought everyone wouldn't like it, but it got, it was nominated. It got all this. I did like Christoph Waltz. I did think I still recognize how good he was, but I've rewatched it over and over again, and I sat down and I've researched it, and I've heard what people had to say about it and their thoughts and what was going on, and kind of going into it with fresh eyes, and doing so, I've enjoyed it more and more and more every time. Like I at this point, it's probably maybe besides Pulp Fiction, the Quentin Tarantino film I've watched the most. And I'm the one I'm keen on watching the most over and over again.
I was just going to say it has a lot of rewatchability, and maybe we'll have to rank that in our wrap-up show or something about which ones could be most rewatched, but this one's up there. I mean, you can just put this on and just have some fun. You don't even necessarily have to watch the entire thing if you don't have however long this is, 2.5 hours? Or?
No, it is. Yeah, it is quite long.
Just watch a chapter at a time and you're good.
Exactly. Or I do think even these scenes do stand up on their own. I don't think that's a detriment to the film. Like, you could take the bar sequence and watch that by itself, and it may not work as well within the film as it does within the film, but I think it works just seeing it as like a YouTube clip and just watching it that way. But there's a lot of scenes in this. You have a scene that kind of stands out to you that you tend to go to and you enjoy the most?
I was just going to ask you the same thing. Or if you had, is talking like the opening chapter and how much you enjoyed that, if there was any other chapter that kind of competed with that as far as your favorite chapter in the film. If I'm going to my favorite scene, man, that is so hard to choose. Because Christoph Waltz's whole thing in the opening is just hard to beat. But then you have Brad.
It's almost like you put that on the side, and it's like, what else?
Right.
What other?
I mean, Brad Pitt's speech and an introduction to the Inglourious Basterds is incredible. I think the bar scene is pretty intense as well. And then just that final climax is good too. I don't know. I'd be, if I'm putting Christoph Waltz's opening aside, it would probably have to be one of the two Brad Pitt scenes, either his opening speech or where he tries to pretend to be from a different country and does that whole thing in the speech.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I think besides, I love the bar scene too, and the introduction would probably be my first go-tos. But besides kind of the obvious, I do like the bear juice sequence, like the part of, I don't know, something about it. Just I like I said, the theatrics of it all, I really enjoy, and it's comedic, it's kind of grotesque in the best ways. So I do really like that, and I do feel like too we should mention who I think with everything going on, I think the one person that maybe gets unfairly overlooked in this is Malene Laurent. I don't know if I'm saying that correct, but Shoshana, who I think is the emotional center of the movie, because like she is the one true victim here, and I think her plight is the most, I think, tragic for sure. And I do think like her as a character is probably the one that is the most well-rounded of all the characters. Like the other ones, like I said, are a lot on theatrics first, like Aldorain and Londa, like they're larger than life, and she isn't that. I think she's putting on a different type of theater where she's just trying to play someone else that's a normal person that's not herself, just so she can survive, because she doesn't want to find out that she's really Jewish. So I do think that some of her sequences are really good, like her back and forth with Daniel Bruhl and the dinner sequence when that she has, and ends up that Christoph Waltz walk in. I think that's a really good standout moment as well. But I do feel like her performance gets overlooked, and I did want to mention it because I do think like without her, I don't think it all comes together.
No, I agree with you. I think it does. It adds everything you just said is very important string throughout. Another thing, if we're talking about characters, that's interesting, I guess, kind of looking back at it, is if you think about it, as much as her character is kind of like what you're saying, kind of that focusing line throughout everything, Aldo's character is interesting because he's literally the only character that doesn't kind of play both sides. He is pretty much the only character that is I don't know if you want to say true to himself the entire time, but I don't know how to word it, but basically, I mean, he is doing the same thing the entire movie. He doesn't outside of like trying to pretend he's from a different country with the whole language thing in that scene, he's not trying to, pretend to like another side or to do anything. He's just Aldo. He's just that Southern American, that guy throughout the whole thing. Whereas you have a lot of other characters that are either double crossing their countries or pretending to be, all these other different things. And he's just pretty much a constant as well. So I think the pairing of those two in different ways, but as kind of a constant thread throughout the whole film is interesting. It's an interesting dynamic between them.
Like his convictions are very evident, and he doesn't really kind of go away from those at all. Like he has no, I would say that there's no, he lacks regret. I would say like he feels no remorse for anything he does, and he kind of revels in the violence that he's occurring and all the Nazi symbols that he carves in people's heads and the scalping and everything like that. It's it's just these little tiny. I guess the scalping and Nazi symbols aren't necessarily little touches, but I do like how Tarantino can take something and, again, like combine, like taking Western culture with scalping and bringing it into a World War II film, which it ends up really working. And I do love like how he can take something that we've seen before and present it in his own way. Like it's remarkable how many times he can do that with each genre, which I think is why he continues to kind of surprise us over and over again.
I had a couple questions for you. Both things that, as we've been going through this spotlight that we've been highlighting as kind of Tarantino things, and we've looked at them, obviously they weren't introduced in those first couple of films, and now we've looked back at them at each film to see, has that film had that element or not? And I was curious to see your take. Obviously, it was nominated for Best Sound and Best Sound Editing. I'm not usually someone that is, and not just with the sound editing, but I'm not usually someone that sees a lot or that notices score, especially the first one or two times I see a movie, unless it's something that's real good. I'm focusing on other things, so sometimes it can kind of slide by me. But in my notes for this watch, kind of to prepare for this episode, I literally wrote down something about a musical note like 4 different times in my notes. Like, the music in this film is awesome. Like the opening scene, how you have the music, how you have it building for the tension in both that first chapter and then again in the bar scene. I mean, the music throughout this whole thing, even when you kind of get to the point where it's in chapter 5 with the Revenge of the Giant Face, you have like this light music playing, kind of a little bit more fun. Like there's a lot of different styles used throughout this, and every single time it never felt jarring to me. It never took me out of the film. It was always the perfect mood setting, the perfect tension building, the perfect whatever they were going for. The music fit every single time in this film.
I agree. And one moment that comes to my mind is actually that going back to that original sequence, that opening sequence, and it's near the end of it when they get found out and basically the guns start firing and the music that keys in there and how it goes along with the gunshots, and it just the mood of the film just changes immediately. And what's interesting with that scene too, I find, is that there's just gunfire going off, and you have the music blaring, but there's no blood. All you see is sawdust,
right.
And I think that's a great image of just the sawdust coming up, and you don't hear any moans, you don't hear any yelling. It's just sawdust, music, and craziness, and it's so effective in that manner. And I think that's Tarantino showing that like he can evoke emotion, he can use violence in a way that's bloodless and still be effective with it, and still not even and make you forget that you're not even looking at blood because your mind's just thinking about what's taking place. So and you just see the aftermath. So I think that's from the beginning, like you said, it's great at just setting the mood, and he uses really unique pieces and like that fit perfectly. Like each note seems like it's meticulously placed in each moment to evoke exactly what he wants to do. So I agree that it may be his best. He's not using soundtrack like he used to, right, but he's using score the thing more effectively than he has in the past.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And one of the other elements that I wanted to bring up and kind of get your take is we've looked at it with every single film we've done is when it comes to the dialogue pieces. And not just the dialogue throughout the film, but is there those dialogue moments where you kind of have the back and forth? We've talked about it in every single film, so we got to talk about it here too. Where do you think this one ranks as far as both just general dialogue and then like as far as number of times where you have those kind of back and forth moments where it's like, akin to some of the diner scenes that we saw in the earlier films or et cetera?
I'll just basically say this. To me, this is the epitome of Quentin Tarantino in every form. Like the dialogue, it's on par with me with Pulp Fiction. The opening conversations all over the place. I think every conversation is interesting and intriguing. It's rich. It's unique in a different way. You don't necessarily have the pop culture references that you're used to, but it's more cultural references of the time and more historical references. But it feels so rich, and even with that, like I think he takes elements of everything he's done up to this point, but especially the dialogue, and I felt like it was on par with anything he's done previously.
I love the rat squirrel discussion in that opening chapter. It's just that is awesome stuff that they had there. And it's just, it's so great to see that. And you kind of can see where the conversation's going, but just to kind of hear it elaborated but especially how Christoph Waltz handled that discussion and kind of his ability to deliver that in the way that he did. And then on top of that, you have the nice visual. Amanda pointed this out to me too, because I almost didn't see it myself, but with him and the other gentleman, I can't remember who's playing that character, but one of them with the Sherlock Holmes style pipe and the other one with the corncob pipe. Yeah. It's just great detail there that they threw in there. So yeah, I agree. The dialogue is amazing. You have Brad Pitt's speech, you have all kinds of stuff, like you said, with all the different cinema references. You don't necessarily get maybe some of the pop culture references, but you definitely get some of that cinema reference, especially in chapter 3. But the bar scene has some great dialogue. It's just throughout. I think it's like you said, it's all of the Tarantino things that we've talked about are blatantly obvious and effective in this film.
Yeah, and what's kind of interesting too is that I hear this complaint a lot with Tarantino, but especially this, where it's just him referencing other films, it's just homaging other movies, and a lot of the stuff he's talking about, like, I honestly don't have any knowledge of, and I think people make a bigger deal out of that than they need to, because without that knowledge that I clearly don't have, it doesn't affect my take on it. I don't feel like I'm left out of the conversation. I don't feel like I am missing something, because I think ultimately that's kind of just window dressing about what they're really getting after. I don't know if you have any of that, where, you know, they're talking about these different directors and films where I personally had no understanding of, but I'd never really bothered me that I didn't have detailed knowledge of what they were speaking of.
No, I feel the exact same way you do.
Yeah. I'm gushing over this movie because it's hard for me not to. Like I said, I think it takes the boldness of Reservoir Dogs, the dialogue of Pulp Fiction. It has the violence, stylistic violence of Kill Bill, the maturity and the deep characters of Jackie Brown. It has, and even, like, to me, the use of genre that Death Proof did. It's like I said, I think it's the epitome of Quentin Tarantino being Tarantino. So I did kind of have just a random fun question for you.
Yeah.
And that is, if you could go back in history and kill Hitler, would you?
Man, I don't think that's a too tough one. Too tough of one.
Well, I preface that by saying I was actually doing a lot of research on this and about Hitler, and they said there was actually plans for the Allies to try to assassinate him, but they actually decided not to, because he was such a bad strategist that if they killed him, the people who would take his place would actually probably do a better job. Yeah, would do a better job, and he was actually helping them lose the war. So
I guess at what point can I go back and take him out?
Exactly. That's the question. You know, if it's like during this, where it's like the height of the war, maybe not, but you might
do it way beforehand.
But there's also someone has a joke where it's like, if you go back in time and you kill Hitler as a baby, you won't be known as the guy that killed Hitler. You'll be known as the guy who went back in time and killed a baby. So, because no one will know who he is. I'm like, that's kind of true. But
I can live with that.
yeah. I think, you know, that was my only hesitance, that, like, some people would say that if we did assassinate him, that it would end up being worse off than we were. So
it's definitely interesting thought there. And also talk about bad strategy. It'd be a very bad idea to put all those people in the same building during a wartime, and especially not in the heart of your own territory.
Yeah.
So to speak. But
and I guess too, like in that actual fire, that there was actually, Eli Roth and some of the characters actually almost did suffer from some smoke issues and whatnot, because that was actually really happening. And the choking of the one actress, like, her name drops, forgets at the moment, but do you know that was actually Tarantino choking her, and like he was actually trying to, like, basically get to the point before really choking her. Yeah, like that really was him choking her with his hands, which is kind of weird. It's like, that's a lot of trust in your director to let him choke you. So
that's something that he couldn't have done in his first film, but now he can.
Yeah. I don't think Harvey Keitel would be like, yeah, it's okay if you choke me. I don't think that's happening anytime soon.
There's also a nifty kind of extended take on that scene in the theater on the Blu-ray too, that you can kind of see a little bit more, which is it's almost too bad they cut that little part out, I thought, because it did add to a point where getting back to some of the real aspects that went on that this included. There's a scene where Hitler's sitting next to Goebbels, and they're watching the film, and I don't remember what happens or what transpires, but at one point he basically is talking about how people would review the film or this, that, and the other, and then he like laughs out loud or whatever, and he says, "Wait, I've outlawed people, writing reviews on films or whatever," which, it speaks to how far that they would go to kind of control the PR and the public, opinion, to not even let stuff be critiqued, or, that whole censorship idea that was going on then. So I thought that was a clever little bit.
Yeah. And Fox is like, I wish we still did that. So, yeah.
Talking about a few other characters, because, obviously we brought up some of the main ones, but I wanted to get your take on a couple of the smaller roles. What was your take on Mike Myers?
Yeah, if there's one thing that didn't completely work for me, it was maybe Mike Myers. Maybe because it was so obviously Mike Myers to me. It just felt like him doing an SNL character. That would be one of two performances that didn't completely work for me.
Tarantino talked about that being the scene where he couldn't get. He said he hates doing exposition scenes. And he said there was no way to get around it, so he was like, "Let's just do the most obvious exposition scene ever with that, and just with the whole map sequence and stuff like that."
Yeah.
I did think there was some cool camera work earlier, though, when they had that different map conversation. I thought was pretty interesting the way they did the camera work there, as well as when they did the camera work when they were showing the explosives on the guy's legs and stuff like that. I thought there were some little cool things here and there. But you mentioned that there was another character that you didn't quite care for. Which one would that be?
It's a very small role, but it was B.J. Novak, who was an actor I like because he's from The Office. I knew him, and I don't know if it was just his performance was bad, but he literally has like 2 lines, and it's near the end where they're kind of going over his nickname as I forget exactly what they call him, but he just feels out of place. Like he doesn't feel like someone who existed at that
little guy or whatever.
Yeah, his reaction to me, I guess, it was hard for me to not connect him with his Office character because it felt like watching a character from from today trying to act. It felt off to me. It was just BJ. It didn't work completely. He seemed out of place compared to everyone else on screen.
I could see that. And okay, so you mentioned 2 of them that you might not have cared for as much, but then on the flip side, you already talked about how this Christoph Waltz basically puts him on the map and. Hello, here's this fantastic actor. Get used to seeing him because you're going to start seeing him a lot. Did you get the same vibe out of a lesser known character in this one, played by one Michael Fassbender?
Yeah, no, I didn't at the time. Honestly, I didn't. Even Daniel Bruhl, who I didn't think not necessarily. He's not probably to the level of Fassbender, but. No, it didn't even cross my mind, but rewatching it, he is really quite good in this. At this point, he really just had, hunger under his belt. I didn't know him at all, really. My first introduction to him.
Yeah, he had been in 300.
Yeah.
Not as someone you would necessarily know right away, in 2006. And then, like you said, Hunger and maybe 1 or 2 small ones before he's in Inglourious Basterds in 2009. Brad Pitt on that conversation, in the roundtable, he literally says, "Man, what a find, this Michael Fassbender, that we found for this film," or whatever. He said, "I'm telling you right now, this guy's going to go on to do great things." I'm going to get the sound bite so we can get it completely how he said it. But I was like, man, Brad Pitt calling it in 2009.
Yeah. And little did he know he would help produce a film that he got nominated for an Oscar in.
Right.
So.
Speaking of Oscars, obviously this film did get quite a bunch of accolades in the Academy Awards, specifically nominated for Best Sound, Best Sound Editing, Best Film Editing, Best Cinematography, Best Original Screenplay, Best Director, Best Picture, and then of course the one win it had would have been for Best Supporting Actor for Christoph Waltz. So the Academy did recognize the greatness of this film.
And it was I think, if I could be mistaken, it was the first time that a Tarantino film won an Oscar. He was nominated before, but I think it was the first time he actually won, or for an acting performance, I should say. I think he might have won for writing, I think, in Pulp Fiction, but the first act, which is surprising because you consider Pulp Fiction. There were some great performances there, but they were only nominated. No one in Jackie Brown, but so it won't be the last time, obviously, that someone wins.
Other stuff, some facts about the film. Obviously, Rotten Tomatoes, it currently has a 89% for critics and an 87% for audiences. And when it came to the box office, it had a budget of $70 million, and it had a total domestic gross of $120 million. So a long way from our first film that we talked about here with the budget and the gross. And if you want to do some interesting rankings as far as World War II settings, it is actually the fourth highest grossing film for World War II. Dan, put you on the spot. Can you think of any that would be above it?
Well, Saving Private Ryan.
That's number one. The other two are hard.
The Longest Day.
Nope. Number two, sadly, is Pearl Harbor. Yeah, Pearl Harbor, number two. Ugh. And then there's a cheat for number three because they're actually counting Captain America, the First Avenger.
Oh, okay.
so it's Saving Private Ryan, Pearl Harbor, Captain America, then Inglourious Basterds as far as World War II films.
It says something about us when those are the four highest grossing World War II films. One's a comic book movie, one's a Michael Bay movie, and then that's kind of funny.
Yeah, and then
I wonder if you adjusted for inflation, what it would really be.
Yeah, that's hard to say. And then when it came to 2009, it was the second highest rated R film. And
2009. Oh, man.
The only one that beat it was The Hangover.
Ah. Oh, wow.
So second highest rated R film for that year, but a good showing from the box office for sure. I just wanted to get a couple of those facts since we've kind of been keeping track of the Rotten Tomatoes and box office stuff for each one.
Yeah, and it's certainly a good bounce back for Tarantino because, like we said, with Death Proof, critically and financially was kind of a disappointment, and I think that says a lot too about a director. Like, if you think directors, I don't think have had films that maybe weren't failures. I wouldn't call Death Proof a failure, but ones that didn't necessarily weren't as successful. Like Spielberg, for example, he had 1941, which was not. It was kind of a disappointing compared to everything he did before. But I think it says a lot about the quality of a director. What does he do next? Do they bounce back? And Spielberg bounced back and made a little movie called Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Quentin Tarantino bounces back and makes Inglourious Basterds. So I think that some people look at that failure and kind of fold, and then those that use it as motivation to do something even greater. And I think that's what makes that separates to me the great directors from just your average good directors.
Well, and this one, like you said, it was an important film for him. If this one is a flop or doesn't come across well, coming off of what he had been doing, that could have meant for some different stuff going forward. So,
yeah, it's also too. I know he even said that it wasn't, and the final product was nothing like he ended up like the original product. Like a lot of the Bastard stuff wasn't in it. So he even mentioned like he could do a prequel film if he really wanted to. I doubt he will, because I was actually listening to an interview where he's like, when I talk about doing sequels and prequels, don't even pay attention because I say that all the time. So it's like he kind of knows he says things out loud. So would you be up for seeing any additional movies within this universe, or do you think like this is kind of good enough?
Well, it's funny because they talk about how much he writes about these characters. What I mean? How much every detail is played out. Like, why is this person doing that? There's a story behind it. What happened between this time and this time? It's actually already written down. Like, he goes so in depth as to the development of these characters, because this is Tarantino's most important thing in a film, is the characters. Like, that is his focus. He's all about the characters, and they were talking about it a little bit, and Brad Pitt was he even blurted out kind of under his breath prequel, because they were kind of talking about what happened in Aldo's past, and kind of to get him to the point where he was, and kind of in that journey, or like basically we have time jumps in this, obviously, from Shoshana hiding under the floorboards to how she gets to involved in the cinema, and that's all stuff that's been written down. He said he actually had a whole another, I don't know if it was a whole chapter shot or whatever, but he actually had already filmed that. He had filmed what had happened to her in between that time, and how she came into owning that cinema, etc. And he said he had it and everything, but he said he would never put it in a director's cut or a DVD or whatever, because after it all was said and done, he liked it better without people knowing and letting them try to kind of figure that out for themselves. But back to your question, I would be interested from an aspect of maybe seeing earlier adventures with the Bastards. Maybe if that was the way they went, I guess that would be the one way that I could see it. But I'm not necessarily saying go do it. I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I wouldn't mind seeing like additional material inspired by Inglourious Basterds, like a comic book or novel or something of that nature. But I think I like it just within itself. Like, I'm like not knowing everything, like having just the idea of what could possibly happen. So if he made a prequel, would I see it? Of course, but that's not something I'm clamoring for. I probably would rather see like Kill Bill Volume 3 rather than like, the story behind Inglourious Basterds or something like that.
Right.
So.
Although there are some great characters in the Bastards that.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's no, I don't doubt the material's there, but it's just like it'd be impossible to match my expectations at this point. Maybe you could, but it feels like I'm just setting myself up for disappointment. Maybe it's too a pessimistic look, I guess.
Yeah, we've been burned too many times.
Exactly. All right. Anything else before we give our final ratings?
I think the only note I have that we didn't somehow touch on at least a little bit was I like the whole idea that they connect, kind of go full circle as far as the first time we see Brad Pitt to the last time, with the whole "would you take the uniform off?"
Yes, yeah.
type thing that he has with that first prisoner that he has compared to when he has it with Christoph Waltz. I love that kind of connection, and just kind of the wink almost to the audience that this is where we're going. But.
So I think that's a good place to go with it too, because at the end it's very much Aldo Raine saying this is his masterpiece, and say what you will, might be Tarantino saying that himself. So where do you rank this? I mean, not necessarily like within Tarantino's films, but if you were going to give this a rating, looking at, you gave Pulp Fiction a 9. Is this to you better than Pulp Fiction? What is your ranking for this?
Man. I'm watching this, and after I watched it, I had a rating in my head, and I'm like, okay, I would give it this rating. But like, the more I'm thinking about it, where do I deduct anything for this film? Like,
I don't know.
How do you take something? I see, because my arbitrary rating in my head that I had in my mind after I did this was also to give it a 9 out of 10. But I feel like I don't know. Do I have a good reason to not give it a 10? Man, I mean, do you have, outside of maybe Mike Myers and, like you said, maybe that one other role that didn't work as well for you, what brings this movie down for somebody? Not necessarily you, but I mean, I know sometimes, you're more in tune with like the critiques that other people have had for it.
Honestly, a lot of the complaints for this, or a lot of the complaints like people have for a lot of Tarantino stuff, they feel like it's sophomoric, like it's brutal with its violence, that it's all style over substance, that it's a lot of just references to things like other films, and it doesn't really hold up on its own. I mentioned the cohesion thing, like people feel like these parts don't necessarily go together. Usually the biggest complaints I've seen. And for me, none of those complaints, I don't have any of them. Like, I hear people saying these things, and I'm like, I don't feel like I watched the same movie as they did. And like I said, like I explained what I had an issue with when I first watched it, and I will freely admit it was more me than the movie, because the power of expectations and can kind of kill you sometimes. But I said, this to me is the epitome. I've said it like 4 times already, but it's the epitome of Quentin Tarantino. And not to give our rankings already, but I legitimately think it's his best movie. It's everything that he was working up towards, and I think it came in to the perfect, the perfect piece of filmmaking. And there are issues, yes, but like, to me, they're so minute and so irrelevant to the overall final product that, to me, it is a 10 out of 10.
And that's why
I said I gave Pulp Fiction a 10, and I still feel it's a 10 film. But is it 10.1 maybe? I don't know. I would rank it within the best films of that year. I would rank it within the best films of the last decade. maybe within the last 20 years or so. Masterpiece is a strong word. I don't like using that word.
I was just thinking in my head the same word, and I'm trying man, that's a heavy word to throw around. But.
Yeah, I feel like that word does more damage than anything. Like I'm hesitant to give it that.
In all intents and purposes, though, like you're saying, it's every piece or every element that we've brought up about Tarantino that we like is in spades in this film. Like it's highlighted, it's spotlighted, it's there, and it's just like, how is this not his masterpiece?
I agree, it's definitely Quentin Tarantino's masterpiece. Now, is it like filmmaking overall masterpiece? I don't know. Like, I feel like I'm not. Mostly, I don't feel like I'm qualified to give that response. I would say it is if you're looking at the career of him, it is his career masterpiece. It's at this point his greatest achievement.
You think people are going to take exception to you saying that and not putting Pulp Fiction in that?
I think there's a lot of people who would agree with that. I think a lot of people do say Pulp Fiction's his best film. I don't know for sure, but I think it's Inglourious Basterds. And I know people who say like Reservoir Dogs is his best movie. I think there is and some people say Jackie Brown. So I think there are, if you're going to poll people, my guess is it's probably Pulp Fiction ahead of everything else. But for me, I love Pulp Fiction. It's probably, if I'm ranking my favorites, it's like I said, it's probably in top 10 favorite films. But looking at it as like a filmmaking standpoint, I have to put this as at the top.
Yeah, and like I said, I can't come up with a single justification for not giving it a 10. I can't think of a single thing I did like about this film.
So this might be the first time in Cinema Geeks history that you gave a 10 even.
I think it might be.
Yeah.
Since we've changed the name, at least.
Yeah.
I think
for a while there we didn't give rankings, so
right.
It was hard to tell. So
maybe back when we were doing some of our earlier episodes on some other stuff like 12 Years a Slave and Her, maybe I would have been tempted on those. But I definitely think I got to give this one a 10 as well. And the scary part is every time I've watched the film, I've liked it better. So
how many times do you think you've seen it up to this point?
Not as many as I thought, because I saw it initially, obviously, and I want to say that there was some times where I didn't necessarily sit down and watch it from beginning to end, but there was quite a few times where I saw a scene or a chapter here and there. Straight through, beginning to end, though, it's probably only at like 3 now, which seems very small, a very small number, but I swear every time I've watched it, it's gone up like times 10 on the enjoyment factor. Like. Yeah. Every time I'm finding more little bits and pieces, I'm laughing more, I'm enjoying more, even though I know what's happening and everything. It's like we said, the rewatchability on this one is pretty high, and it's just the dialogue, the comedy, the music, the tension, everything builds perfectly. And even if you don't like any of that, just for the freaking acting performances by Christoph Waltz, Brad Pitt, Michael Fassbender, etc., from top to bottom, is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing you'd say it doesn't have is that it doesn't, like I said, have a lot of the more soundtrack elements as other films, but it's made up for, which is one of his best use of score.
Which almost is more impressive to me.
Yeah.
To be able to set those moods and stuff like that.
But I think we'll see a return of the use of soundtrack for next week for Django Unchained. But I think that'll bring us to the end of the episode. But if you want to get in contact with us and maybe remark that maybe we're a little bit too hyperbolic with this film, maybe we didn't praise enough or what have you, there's tons of ways to do so. You can email us at feedback@geekcastradio.com. We're also on Twitter at CinemaGeekCast. And Kevin, what's your Twitter name?
Mine is @OptimusSolo, and I can't wait to get crap for now finally giving that score that people are going to say is too high.
Exactly. And I'm at Movie Revolt. But that'll be it for this week. But make sure to join us next week as we continue the Quentin Tarantino retrospective as we review Django Unchained. We'll catch you next time.